Hello everyone, today I'm going to be talking about artificial intelligence, its economic impact, and why the coming industrial revolution will be different from the previous ones, in a bad way. Let's go through our agenda for today. First of all, I'm going to argue why my position is not Ludism. In case you don't know, Ludism was a movement in the 19th century in England. Its members were scared of technological progress that was taking their jobs away. What they did was destroying factories, machine tools, and so on. So I'm gonna argue why my position is different. Next, I'm gonna show you three major differences between then and now and explain why these differences matter. The first difference I'm gonna address is that finding a new job is more difficult today than it used to be back then. Next, I'm gonna show why labor may be fully displaced today and why this was not the case back then. Finally, I'm gonna show that underdeveloped countries will be lagging behind. Let's begin with the first difference. People were losing jobs due to technological progress all the time. For example, 2 centuries ago, when sewing machines were introduced, many seamstresses lost their jobs. But thankfully, that was temporary. They quickly learned how to use sewing machines and got their jobs back. But what happens now? Now, accountants lose their jobs because AI algorithms do the same with less errors, cheaper, and faster. So, what should accountants do to avoid getting fired? Well, I don't know, and no one knows. Today, finding a new job is much harder than it used to be 200 years ago. The second difference. I'm going to argue that today, labor may be fully displaced, but it wasn't the case 2 centuries ago. Why so? Let me show you a simple example. Consider a factory operating 2 centuries ago. It has some initial state when labor accounts for about two-thirds of its output. Then machine tools are introduced. It means that workers become more productive because they can produce more with the same amount of time, effort, and so on. Then the factory owner figures out that it is possible to sustain the same amount of output with less labor. It fires some of its employees. Okay, so what happens next? So then the factory owner figures out that it is now capable of producing the same output with less costs because it uses less labor. It means that the price of its items is lower than the prices of competitors. It means that the factory owner now wants to expand the factory, so she hires more employees. But now labor still accounts for two-thirds of output. It is a popular theoretical result proved by Cobb and Douglas, but it's not just theoretical, it is proved by data. Data shows that wages account for about two-thirds of income, but it was until recently. What has changed? Let's consider the same example but in today's context. What can possibly change? Well, the difference is that 200 years ago there was no revolution. Yes, no revolution, you've been lied to. The first industrial revolution was just a bunch of random inventions spread over 60 years, so no revolution was happening then. But today, progress is continuous. It happens day in, day out. Every day, AI developers report progress. So the difference is that back then progress was sporadic, but now it is continuous. So suppose you're a factory owner, but now it's called executive. Everything stays the same so far. You figure out that you can fire some of your employees and still sustain the same amount of output. Another shock is happening right now. Labor productivity is now 40% higher again. So what happens then? Employees get fired, then labor productivity increases, employees get fired. It happens again and again and again. So you can see that labor share enters a downward spiral. It means that labor share will eventually shrink to zero. So let me summarize that. The continuous nature of today's progress may cause labor to be fully displaced by capital. Let's now talk about the third, final difference. What was the transnational impact of tech development 1.5 centuries ago? Suppose that England builds railroads, but it takes weeks to get from England to India, so no globalization is possible then. It means that the fact that England has built its railroads has practically no impact on India. It means that India develops independently. What's different today? Well, suppose that Google develops a new algorithm. It may be accessed by the Indian users the same day it is accessed by the US users. It shows that globalization today is very high, and particularly in AI, IT, and related fields. It means that Indian IT companies have to compete with the US IT companies. It's obvious that developed countries, just like the US, have a huge advantage over developing and underdeveloped countries. It means that India will lose competition to the US. Therefore, underdeveloped countries will stay underdeveloped countries, and there is no way to escape this poverty trap. So let me summarize everything I've said so far. Everything is different this time. Today, it's harder to learn new skills for new occupations than it used to be. Next, progress is so fast that labor may be fully displaced. Finally, underdeveloped countries will be lagging behind, staying poor, underdeveloped, and so on. It will increase unemployment rates, individual level inequality, and country level inequality. These are major threats to sustainable economic growth and well being of people and economic stability. But we should be very careful about AI. It has a disruptive power, and we should be very careful when using it. We should consider and take into account all of its threats, which are major and severe and worth considering. That's all I've wanted to say. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you liked my presentation.